All right, the next item, I am so pleased that we will have an update on the efforts of the Office of Equity, Diversity, and Opportunity. And so as Dr. Mance comes forward, I do want to, and Mrs. Lewis come forward. I think they're both coming forward. I just want to mention that, the board has received a number of updates this year specifically related to our strategic plan, Destination 2025, and oftentimes those, provide some truncated overviews of things that we're doing, and oftentimes we're nodding to the work of this incredible office and many of the initiatives that are being championed and work that's being led through the Office of Diversity and Opportunity. So wanted to bring forward a presentation today that would allow us to go into a little more depth of some of the efforts that have been underway. Certainly that presentation won't represent all of the incredible efforts, but really lifts up some of the key pieces, many of which you've heard bits and pieces about in other presentations as we've highlighted the work of the strategic plan Destination 2025. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Dr. Manz to get us started.
Hello and good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the Board of Directors, and Dr. Cashwell. My name is Monica Manz, and I am the Chief Equity, Diversity, and Opportunity Officer for Henrico County Public Schools. Tiffany Lewis is the Coordinator for Culturally Responsive Learning in our office. Henrico County Public Schools embraces and celebrates the diversity of our community. So before we begin, we'd like to commemorate the Native peoples on whose ancestral homelands we convene, as well as the diverse and dynamic Native communities who make their homes here today. More specifically, as we gather in Highland Springs, Virginia, we honor the Chickahominy and Powhatan peoples who were the original occupants, leaders, families, students, and teachers of this region. To anchor some of our work today, we want to acknowledge our county strategic plan, Destination 2025. The plan for Henrico County Public School has noted the strategic goals and drivers we support throughout our presentation. As you are familiar, the four cornerstones are safety and wellness, which includes establishing and maintaining a school climate that is equitable and inclusive for all stakeholders. Academic growth, which focus on supporting students to reach their potential through core content and life skills. Equity and opportunity, which calls for a collective approach of all stakeholders to reduce disparities and to cultivate meaningful, culturally relevant experiences. And relationships, which promotes the building of authentic, trusting connections that promote engagement of all stakeholders. The work of equity is interwoven into every strategic goal, but today we have highlighted the goals that embody the most of our efforts. I'll now introduce Tiffany Lewis, who will provide an overview of our efforts.
Thank you, Dr. Manz. In that effort, the Office of Equity, Diversity, and Opportunity structures our work in alignment with the strategic goals and implementation drivers expressed in the strategic plan in the categories of academic excellence through the preparation of life-ready knowledge, skills, and experiences, an inclusive, safe, and supportive climate that holds all individuals in high regard, recruit, retain, and reward educators who nurture and grow the whole child, cultivate and maintain collaborative partnerships that provide equitable access to resources for all students, strength in diversity, embracing the contributions of a culturally expansive community, and an equitable and secure environment that fosters a shared responsibility for physical learning environments and pride in community. When it comes to ensuring academic success for all students, we use the Henrico Learner Profile, Deeper Learning Model, and the lens of the Culturally Responsive Education Model, or CREM, framework to drive student engagement, which we know addresses opportunity and closes achievement gaps, increases enrollment in gifted advanced courses, and ensures we have academically oriented enrichment programming for all students with a focus on our historically marginalized groups. This work focuses on professional development, equity teams, collaboration with schools, and opportunities that are aligned with the HCPS Culturally Responsive Education Model, or CREM, which is rooted in scholarly research and application and reflects feedback from community members and school leadership to ensure alignment with the district's goals, core values, and mission. The Office of EDO has intentionally phased the CREM framework in a digestible and practical way for staff. CREM Part 1 focuses on self-reflection and a culture of belonging displayed in the center of the infographic. This entails the paradigm shifting necessary to support inclusivity and belonging by promoting the exploration of one's own cultural beliefs and biases, seeking to learn about our students' identities to ensure learning is connected to their lived experiences, and creating supportive, welcoming environments that feel socially and emotionally safe so that students are comfortable enough to take risks. This professional learning expects participants to expand their thinking to intentionally craft opportunities to ensure that students learn to relate to one another through positive communication. CREM Part 2 explores the content integration and knowledge construction components of CREM, which focus on self-reflective education practices to promote a culture of belonging within the classroom and school community, the construction of beliefs, perspectives, and systems, as well as the incorporation of culturally relevant content into the curriculum. CREM Part 3 focuses on the equity pedagogy and prejudice reduction components of CREM by recognizing and addressing prejudice, bias, and inequity to create a culture of belonging with authentic instructional practices that promote student engagement. CREM 4 focuses on the empowering school culture component of CREM, which supports curating belonging amongst all school community stakeholders, students, staff, families, and community members. To date, over 400 principals, assistant principals, content specialists, curriculum writers, school counselors, school psychologists, school social workers, and teachers have completed meaningful professional development on CREM Part 1 via face-to-face, synchronous training sessions and/or asynchronous presentations and discussion activities on Schoology. By the end of the 2021-2022 school year, our school leaders will have completed CREM Part 1 and CREM Part 2, which support the development of a critical cultural lens, the principles of warm demandingness, best practices for content integration, and knowledge construction. Additionally, EDO has partnered with the Department of Teaching, Learning, and Innovation to create training for curriculum writers. This 5-hour training is designed to build curriculum writers' capacity to apply a critical cultural lens and the content integration aspects of CREM to their curriculum writing in an effort to close the achievement gap. Over the last 2 summers, we have hosted an Ensuring Equity series, which offers online learning courses aligned to the culturally responsive education model and centered around cultural sensitivity, belonging, poverty, culturally responsive principles, and dignity. Over 1,500 HCPS staff members have participated in at least one of these courses. Pre- and post-course survey results indicate overwhelmingly positive feedback from educators on their growth and understanding of themselves and others. Finally, as part of our district's comprehensive plan to increase the enrollment of historically marginalized students in gifted advanced courses and academically oriented enrichment programming, we provide training for school leaders to build their capacity for this work. For the last 2 years, with the Office of Professional Learning and Leadership, we have provided training within the Aspiring Leader Academy cohort and with the AP Learning Series cohort this current school year, with sessions focusing on developing and applying a critical cultural lens to real-life leadership experiences and learning best practices for addressing inequities and ensuring access and inclusivity to these opportunities. In the next goal area, EDO supports opportunities that advance the inclusive, safe, and supportive climate strategic goal drivers in various ways. EDO works closely with the Division of Teaching, Learning, and Innovation and other areas to promote and deploy positive behavioral interventions and supports, to develop programs that enhance feelings of belonging, and to support language acquisition. Staff also collaborate with school leadership to grow capacity to implement equity programming with a focus on ensuring that practices curate feelings of belonging for all students, as well as address the barriers that have existed for students to enter into gifted and advanced learning programs, and coach staff on practices that proactively and reactively address bullying. We approach achievement gaps from a stance of belonging, observing that academic performance may correlate with how well students feel they belong in their learning communities. Access does not necessarily equate to a student's sense of belonging in a program. Therefore, in tandem to promoting access, HCPS provides professional learning to school leaders and staff on best practices for curating belonging and developing opportunities that will enhance students' capacity to thrive within their educational settings. Essentially, by cultivating inclusive, safe, and supportive learning environments, students are promoted to excel academically and socially by fostering a sense of belonging and contribution to the school community. For example, in 2020 through 2021, the Office of EDO trained more than 80 school leaders in the area of responsive language. Leaders learned behavioral strategies to utilize with students, ranging from asking open-ended questions that stretch students' capacity to think and to self-reflect, to providing respectful, remindful, and redirectable language. This year, we provided specialized ongoing coaching on restorative language, de-escalation, and restorative practices to our deans of students. Over 400 individuals have been trained in restorative practices in the last 4 years. In addition, our team provides annually culturally responsive training to our school resource officers. Our efforts collectively work to assist staff with curating a culture of belonging in schools for their students and staff. Destination 2025 also includes drivers related to the use of peer and language buddies to foster student engagement with historically marginalized subgroups. This year, the Office of EDO piloted a language navigator peer mentorship program, having high school students who speak a second language to mentor level 1 English learner middle school students across the division. We currently have 6 language navigators fluent in English and another language working with EL students from our Henrico middle schools. Students were matched based on the middle school students' native non-English language to ensure the ability to comfortably communicate with one another and to build relationships on a foundation of similar lived experiences. The pairs meet virtually twice a month. All of the language navigators are awarded volunteer hours for their efforts. EDO continues to secure grant funding for programming to ensure inclusive, safe, and supportive schools. We are excited to share that recently HCPS was awarded a substantial grant from the Henrico Education Foundation to pilot the Rights of Belonging program in 3 of our middle schools next year. Previous school climate surveys indicate that some middle school students struggle with belonging. The goal of Rights of Belonging is to improve students' sense of belonging by focusing on self-esteem, self-efficacy, and self-actualization. The program will contain several components: community involvement, positive role models, collective instruction, cultural and personal identity development, high expectations, safe and supportive environments, and purpose and achievement. HCPS is also leveraging opportunities to address discipline disproportionality among Black and non-Black peers. Research shows that beyond consequences, the answer to such disproportionality is empowerment, which involves equipping students with skills and resources to combat negativity and to uplift a heightened sense of mental health and wellness. The concept of Black girlhood is being deconstructed in current research as educational scholars and practitioners are attempting to understand Black girls' expressions of worry and frustration in their daily lives, which often leads to anger and results in disciplinary issues within and outside of schools. In partnership with the Office of Community and Family Engagement, EDO has established a Black Girl Empowerment Committee to address the issue using a three-pronged approach. 1, parent and community awareness, 2, staff awareness, and 3, student support. The committee hosted 2 parent and community awareness events this year, a book reading series for staff, and partnered with the community organization Girls for a Change. We are excited to share that we have received grant funding from the county to support this effort. And in the 2022-2023 school year, we are hoping to provide varied levels of tiered support for all of our middle schools and for 2 of our high schools. The UNITY Black Girl Empowerment Grant will serve approximately 80 to 100 middle school Black girls per year across 4 on-site school groups, Brookland, Elko, Roth, and Wilder, and 40 to 60 high school Black girls per year across 3 on-site school groups, Henrico, Highland Springs, and Glen Allen. Our office collaborates closely with the Office of Human Resources and the Division of School Leadership to ensure that we are recruiting, retaining, and rewarding the best possible educators. In the past, educators have expressed the need for greater racial alignment between staff and students. However, we are experiencing an increasing difficulty in retaining educators across our district, and it is important that we work to ensure we have educators in all of our classrooms, as well as establish supports to ensure greater racial proportionality between staff and students. It is not an either or, but a both and. Today, we will share a few highlights that involve EDO. In partnership with VCU's Metropolitan Education and Research Consortium, MERC, the Office of EDO supported a cohort of teachers at Tuckahoe Middle and Quioccasin Middle engaged in action research on the impact of culturally responsive education practices in their classrooms with the development of a course. To ensure an appreciation that these groups are open to all while still maintaining a clear intention to the needs of a particular group or theme, we have recently reclassified our staff affinity groups as education resource groups. EDO currently sponsors the following groups: teachers of color, including Indigenous, Asian, Pacific Islander, Latinx, Hispanic, and Black educators, or the Black Educator Collective, referred to as BEC. Monthly meetings with participants include guest speakers, professional development opportunities, mindfulness excursions like BEC Unplugged and EDO Unplugged are all part of this support. In order to make sure that this work is done in a way that is both appropriate and timely, the education resource groups for staff have been set up in cycles. For now, we're only going to talk about 2 groups because they've been in effect for the last 2 years. The Allyship Co-Conspirator Education Resource Group, Cycle 1, Understanding Your Role, is a place for staff to learn about their roles and responsibilities as allies and collaborators for social change, both personally and in the educational ecosystem. They also talk about ways to change the status quo of racial inequities in education. During Cycle 2, Changing Hearts, members work on improving their communication skills so that they can do things to fight educational inequality. During Cycle 3, Navigating Pushback, members provide viable best practices, or members are provided with viable best practices for responding to pushback from stakeholders who do not believe in the work. During Cycle 4, Elevation, members receive advancement of work by learning about others' efforts inside and outside of the county around this work and elevating their own efforts with the wider educational community. The Black Educator Collective, or BEC, consists of 4 cycles. Cycle 1, Voice, is a place where staff can talk about their past and current feelings about being a Black staff member in HCPS, navigate talking about their concerns with their peers and leaders, and solve problems for Black staff and students. For Cycle 2, the focus is agency, allowing educators to discuss how dynamic historical and current Black educators have influenced the field of education and current pedagogical practices. Cycle 3 focuses on recognition, recognizing educators for their positive contributions to the field of education, both inside and outside of the classroom. Cycle 4, Elevation, believes in the advancement of Black educators and the promotion of their professional expertise in HCPS and the wider educational community. All of our education resource groups, or formerly known staff affinity groups, have utilized partnerships with outside organizations via guest speakers and excursion opportunities, specifically in support of Unplugged events. The Unplugged events provide experiences for participants to explore enriching opportunities that support mental and emotional well-being. In May 2021, BEC hosted its first healing hike with the Valentine Museum's Figures of Freedom Shackle Bottom Tour. The experience was designed to help BEC participants learn to utilize self-care techniques for navigating life. In August 2021, the Office of EDO sponsored its first EDO Unplugged event, in which all of the education resource groups visited the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts, the Dirty South exhibit. To date, we have serviced over 120 participants in our voluntary education resource groups. Looking ahead to support recruitment, HCPS is set to launch a new program this summer called GOATED, which stands for Goal-Oriented Athletes in Education. With an acronym familiar to sports conversations worldwide, our GOATED initiative includes current Henrico County staff members with shared backgrounds as former college and/or professional athletes, who will provide helpful information for current college student athletes regarding the benefits of pursuing education as a field of study. Utilizing their personal experiences, our GOATED educators will encourage local college-aged student athletes to consider education as a professional career. Another program partners HCPS with Virginia State University for the Virginia Randolph New Teacher Legacy Program, designed to provide provisionally licensed teachers an opportunity to take graduate or undergraduate courses at a significantly reduced fee. Classes will be taught by current or past HCPS school leaders. In addition, the program offers intentional support on issues ranging from social emotional resilience in the workforce to developing generational wealth group experiences, as well as offers participants the opportunity to be a part of our education resource groups, designed with specialized focus areas. The program will also include training school leaders on best practices for supporting provisionally licensed teachers. Our internal budget funds a portion of this program with support from the Henrico Education Foundation. And as you can see on the screen, as part of the teacher career ladder, HCPS will offer micro-credentials and specialization in CREM.
As you can see, an important part of the Office of EDO's work involves collaboration with families as well as internal and communities, which lead us to the next goal area of our Destination 2025, cultivating and maintaining collaborative partnerships. Two specific areas of focus include supporting families who may face barriers to involvement and steadily building community partnerships to provide diverse on-site and off-site learning experiences. Henrico County Public Schools is comprised of over 9,000 multilingual students with 123 countries represented and 130 languages spoken. The district supports all students, including immigrants, refugees, new Americans, and limited English-speaking families, by bringing together individuals, nonprofits, school officials, county officials, advocates, students, and families to enhance communication with our diverse communities, elevating and collaboratively addressing their needs, and advocating for the diverse community. Efforts included food distribution and resource connections to empower students with community advocacy. Some of our partners and collaborators are noted on the screen. Next, I'd like to talk about our HCPS SMART program, which is supported by an ESSER grant. It provides literacy resources to the county's after-school and summer programs that are located in 4 of our subsidized housing communities. We are giving books to students, supplementing their programs' internal libraries, and providing training to many of the mental health community staff who work in the programs located in the subsidized housing communities. Our team has also worked with career technical education centers to create book nooks for all of the communities and facilitated a partnership with Henrico County Libraries to keep them filled. Finally, working alongside the Department of Community and Family Engagement, we continue to cultivate relationships with organizations that expose students to new experience. This includes organizations such as Girls for a Change. We work closely with Light of Hope, various religious groups that serve our community, museums, and history-based foundations and organizations. These partnerships provide greater access to include virtual field trips to historical sites. We've worked to increase gallery visits and provided virtual film screenings. Our office works across the division to strengthen diversity, realizing that people's lived experiences and backgrounds mean that there will be multiple opinions is part of being a culturally responsive leader. When people are not aligned, it helps to have a courageous conversation about the attitudes and ideas that they bring to the table. We support dialogues that allow everyone to learn, to listen, to understand others' positions. Our mission is to help school leaders and equity teams mobilize all perspective, understand the complexities of the issues, and build shared values and goals. We also aim to ensure that students and staff have the opportunity to learn about diverse groups. As a school board, you have been instrumental in supporting and leveraging the district's strength for diversity. Your work to ensure that division policies are equitable and remove barriers that perpetuate inequities is vital and allows school administration to establish practices that do the same. Work in this area supports our multi-year, multi-pronged training plan that includes, but is not limited to, our Equity Coalition and Team Professional Learning Series, our Equity Ambassador Leadership Professional Learning Series, our Cultural Heritage Series, and other ancillary trainings we provide. Our overarching goal of our Elementary Equity Coalition is to provide strategies for building empathy and acceptance as a measure to counter bullying and harassment. This year, our Elementary Equity Coalition Professional Learning Series centered around providing best practices for fostering a sense of belonging for all students. Secondary equity teams engage in intensive PL designed to examine personal belief systems, understanding systemic inequities, and identifying school-based inequities for the purpose of designing their equity action plan. Ongoing coaching support is provided through the Office of Equity, Diversity, and Opportunities. Through this work, we have seen schools enhance the intentionality of communication exchanges with diverse students and families, break down localized barriers, and craft peer-to-peer support programs. As previously mentioned, over the last 2 summers, we have hosted an Ensuring Equity series, which offers online learning courses designed in alignment with our culturally responsive education model framework, all centered around cultural sensitivity, belonging, poverty, culturally responsive principles, and dignity. Last year, we crafted an Equity, Diversity, and Opportunity Facilitator Learning Series to supplement our school-based mental health professional skills and to ensure the information that they share is in alignment with the language and expectations being used by our office. We have had a total of 40 staff participants in this training. In alignment with our strategic plan, we have designed the Cultural Heritage Series to provide particular focus on the Cultural Heritage Months that we received the most requests for from the community and that represent the diversity of HCPS. For the Cultural Heritage Series, we designed programming specifically for Black History Month, or African American Heritage Month, Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month, Hispanic Latinx Heritage Month, and Native American and Indigenous Peoples Heritage Month. Some of our past events include a homegrown Black Henrico panel, Black History Month Video Challenge, that was 2022. I Know I Can Book Talk, A Salute to Asian Cultures, AAPI Teacher Panel, Latinx Teacher Panel, Diversity in Science, a Latinx Community, Native American Indigenous Teacher Panel, Pocahontas Refamed Virtual Film Festival with the BMFA. More than 1,000 participants, including students, staff, and families and community, have engaged in our Cultural Heritage Series events. Student participation in these events is key as HCPS continues to take steps to support greater student voice around equity, diversity, and opportunity. One area where we have seen great success is the Equity Ambassadors Initiative. The HCPS Equity Ambassadors received a Best Achievement Award from the Virginia Association of Counties, which is the highest honor they award. Equity ambassadors, as well as other student voice initiatives, are meant to give students a stronger voice and give them the confidence to speak up for themselves in a constructive way. In order to promote the mission of the Equity Ambassadors, we created online modules to develop bridges to compassion, inclusivity, and respect for everyone. Now, any student seeking district recognition at graduation must complete the 4 self-paced leadership activity models. Over the last 3 years, more than 500 students have participated in the Equity Ambassador Program. Equity, belonging, and unity are the key themes to this year's Equity Ambassador programming. As new challenges arise and uncertainty lingers in our society, our Equity Ambassadors will be there to listen, understand, and help. You will learn more about our students' efforts in June when they are here to give their presentation. The voluntary Windows and Mirrors Book Club has expanded from 1 book to 3 this year. Students voluntarily, with parent permission, engage in book clubs where they are currently reading Stamp, The History of Racism, The Making of Asian American History, and Tell Me Who You Are. Each book provides an in-depth look at identity, race, and culture in the United States. You will hear more about the tremendous work and the impact that the Equity Ambassadors, book club members, and also our language navigators, which we mentioned earlier, are making during presentation at the school board in June. When I started this job, I toured our district's neighborhoods and schools to get an input from over 200 people. Initial community expectations were shaped in part by data, including the employment and retention of teachers, and asked that I look closely at including the employment and retention of teachers of color, as well as the care of equal facilities and classroom. Later, when I had our EDAC members from all of our magisterial districts, that perspective broadened. They produced a detailed report for the school board in 2019 that offered a thoughtful analysis and recommendation on community issues. And they also identified the need for us to have more cultural awareness and responsive education practices in our schools. Parents and students alike also adamantly expressed a desire to have their students learn and discuss nuanced and complex, historically accurate information. Throughout all of my conversations with students, they were absolute in their desire to have their voices heard and be a part of addressing inequality within their communities and their schools. They wanted to assist with the curation of creating safe spaces for belonging within their school. They asked to do this in collaboration with students, not just at their school, but across the district. As seen in our presentation, the community expectations set forward for the work conducted in our office are still in direct alignment with our strategic goals, and our beliefs respond to both. We recognize that much more can be done and are up for the challenge as we continue to listen and respond to all voices in Henrico County Public Schools. Henrico County Public Schools is making great strides related to equity, diversity, and opportunity. Of course, we still work to do, and we are eager to continue as we move forward as a school community, using Destination 2025 and stakeholder input as our guides. At this time, we are happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Dr. Manz and Ms. Lewis, for that extensive report. And I know that still just kind of touches on a lot of the work that you have been doing. I'll start with Reverend Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So again, Dr. Manz and Ms. Lewis, I thank you. I want to thank you for this presentation. As always, I'm honored to represent this board as the board representative on the Equity and Diversity Advisory Committee. The Virginia Superintendent of Public Instruction issued a report identifying inherently divisive concepts in Virginia public education. The report further stated that this interim report rescinds certain policies, programs, and resources that promote discriminatory and divisive concepts as directed by Governor Youngkin's Executive Order Number 1. Dr. Manz, have we received any further guidance regarding this report and/or Executive Order 1? And in your professional opinion, what impact will this have on the important work that your office is doing?
As of now, we've not received any more additional guidance, so I can't really speak to that part of it. What I can say is that it's based off of our strategic plan that was created by our community, and I think it's really important that we say that our strategic plan was created by our collective community. We are absolute in our work. I think the school board, you all have stood behind this work. Dr. Cashwell, since she's onboarded with our, has stood behind this work. And so it is my belief that we are doing the work that is asked of us by our county. And I don't want to say it's not in alignment with the state because I do not know what the state is actually saying that the divisive concepts are, so.
Dr. Cashwell, have anything you want to add to that just quickly about, if you heard anything on your level?
Yeah, I mean, I think Dr. Manz said everything I would have said, which is, no, we have not received any specific direction in relation to state guidance or that EO2, but to Dr. Manz's point, I think what you saw today in an update in the work is, we've been very clear and intentional about the goals and the things we're trying to accomplish in Henrico County Schools is articulated throughout our strategic plan, community stakeholder developed, community voices representative in that plan, and those are the goals we've set out to accomplish, and we're on track to do so.
To both of yours point, I think the presentation does a phenomenal job of highlighting the goals and the areas that have been and will continue to be impacted through our work of our Office of EDO. We as a board have worked hard along with our superintendent to ensure that we acknowledge the strength that is found in diversity, as your slide referenced. However, given the efforts from the administration in regards to the attempts to dismantle efforts at teaching cultural and racial diversity, what support will your office need from me, say as a board member, to ensure that we continue to foster a culturally responsive education model, that we continue to align with our Destination 2025 strategic goals centered around equity, and ensure that the work of our Office of EDO continues?
So I would say one of the things is communication, making sure that the community appreciates the work that we're doing and understand that it aligns with the strategic plan, so that these are not arbitrary decisions that we make, that all of our decisions and the things that we are doing are in alignment with what's asked of us to complete as part of that strategic plan, and that it's representative of the entire, it's not representative of the loudest voices, it's representative of all of our voices. So I would say that to me is what probably the most paramount thing that I could use support with the school board, is ensuring that your communities really understand and appreciate that. Also making sure that your communities appreciate the nuances and complexities that exist within you all have extremely interesting districts. When I'm meeting with leaders across the country, when I talk about our complexities of our district, just our demographics, they are always shocked. We have a very complex demographic here in our district, and I think that it's important that we understand that, and we understand the nuances that come with having those complexities, right? And so I think that is another area in which is important that we share out. Obviously, I could always use more support resources. But I think all of us could, right? So I don't think that's just a me issue. I think that's an all issue. But I think you all have done, and I really truly say this, since I have been in this position, I have never felt not supported by the school board. We've all had our, I think all of us are growing pains, but at the end of the day, I really appreciate the support that you all have provided to me for this work, and I appreciate Dr. Cashwell's support she's provided as well.
I appreciate that. I think, again, it's important to say that we are conscious and cognizant of the diversity and the complexity of our county. But I think that we do work together well as a county as far as districts to ensure that every voice is heard, and that every ethnic group is respected and appreciated, and that there's, again, strength in our diversity. So thank you so much, Ms. Lewis, and you, Dr. Manz. Madam Chair, I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Cooper. Ms. Kinsella?
Yes, I guess to piggyback on what Reverend Cooper started to say, that this is strategic plan. It is driven, everything that you're doing is driven by the strategic plan. And as someone who sits on the strategic plan steering committee and on the strategic plan committee, we have infused equity, diversity, and opportunity throughout the entire plan. So I don't see, regardless, really, and maybe Dr. Cashwell can correct me if I'm wrong, I don't see a way, given the work, given our commitment and how it's infused in every aspect of what we do in Henrico schools, I don't see us deviating from what we're doing, as there's nothing toxic or inflammatory or political or divisive about it, especially since, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, we actually use the stakeholder feedback to drive the work. For example, as stakeholder feedback being our annual climate survey that students, staff, and community members take, that's how this is created, correct? I mean, I just want folks to be really
Yeah.
clear.
I think the goals and the drivers are crystal clear. I mean, we will always want to solicit feedback along the way to shape, any of our efforts if we need to reshape them so that we're having a stronger impact, a better impact, making sure that that our efforts are meeting the needs of the community and that ultimately are setting us up to reach our goals. So, I mean, I certainly agree that what we've set forth is the plan, and it's certainly what guides our work. And, any adjustments we'd be making would be in response to, better serving our community and better meeting the needs of the goals and adjusting as, we do monitor progress. You get to see a lot of data shared sometimes, with particular equity indices, some of those points. We're saying, hey, we're not moving the needle here. What additional efforts might we employ? So certainly don't want to say that every bit of the path is predetermined or laid out. There's still lots of work to be done. There's certainly lots of feedback to be garnered, and as we continue to embark on this work.
Sure, it's ongoing and responsive to community, correct? And just to once again highlight what Reverend Cooper said, we are an increasingly diverse school district, right? Do you feel, how long have you been with us, Dr. Mance?
4 years.
Do you feel, was a lot of this work in place when you arrived?
No.
Okay, so
I think that, I want to be careful what I say. I think that there was a lot of people who wanted to do the work.
Right.
But I don't know that there was a centralized focus on the work. I think that's a more fair assessment of it.
When you're doing the work, you and Ms. Lewis, who have done a lot, and I can't forget to thank Ms. O'Neill, who was previously a part of your department. When you're doing the work in schools and training, are you just receiving, or a lot of people responding positively to the training that you're doing?
I think yes. I think, the work sometimes requires you to do some self-reflection, right? And that's not always easy. And so people have to be centered within their own self to engage in that type of self-reflection. And so I would say generally, we have not received any negative feedback, but I do know that there's times of uncomfortability. But one thing that I always tell people, that if you're always comfortable, then you're never growing, right? The uncomfortability of the conversation lends to your personal growth. And so my goal is never to make anyone feel bad or to somehow make them feel less than. My goal is to always say, let's sit in this uncomfortability, let's think through it, and then what can we learn from that? Right? And so it's a growth mindset, or at least that's why the work that we do, we tend to have, I would say, a growth mindset around it. But in general, we've received a very positive response. And I think it's really because of the way we present the information. And then we also back it all up with scholarship. These things are not based on my opinions. I'm very big about ensuring that there is scholarship that can back up why we do everything, so that if there's ever a time when someone wants to push a little bit with it, we can say, and let me make sure that you appreciate the research behind this particular statement that I've said, or this particular program I designed.
Right. And then new to your presentation, or at least it jumped off the screen at me, is your bullet point for refugee immigrant work. Can you tell me more about this support in our communities? Because I know I have a large refugee immigrant population, and I believe Mrs. Shea does as well.
So, we think about the COVID as the blessing, the curse and the blessing, right? What I really think that we were able to do during COVID, when we began to see that many of our immigrant and refugee families really weren't accessing the supports we were offering, we put together a group, pulled together a group with Sarah Modrak. I really want to shout her out of English Learning. She's our English Learning Specialist. We pulled together a group of community members who were working to support immigrant and refugee families, and we just started conversating. So we came together just to talk. What are you doing? How are you supporting it? Just so we could begin to say, how are we getting the needs of our families met? And from there, they began to develop relationships and partnerships amongst themselves, because these groups had never had one place where they were all talking together. So from that group, we were really able to see that we needed some more support. So I've been able to identify about 10 hours a week. We've identified an immigrant and refugee student coordinator who's going to be helping me micro map some of the, some of our communities, so that we can really delve further into what are the individualized community needs, because the communities are so different and their needs look very different. And so these are not things that are going on at school, they're actually going on in the community. So most of her work is in the community, and we are doing it alongside ICNA, which is another group that serves a large number of refugee and immigrant communities as well. We've had, just for an example, over 240 plus families of Afghans, refugees, students who've come in, and we were only told we were going to have 100. And so just giving you an idea, like, where are these families living? And so we're trying to make sure that we not only understand where they're living, what are their needs and how can we meet them? And so again, I can go a long litany of conversation around that, but in conversation, we've identified that there were some real food issues with them being able to get to where food was, because a lot of times they did not understand how to access supports in America, because it's very different from their home countries. So that's just an example of some of the things that this particular coordinator will be doing.
I appreciate you expanding more on that, because I know last time when we talked about immigrant refugee families, were we seeing an influx? With the data was not showing us that we were. And what you just said, 240
plus
families? Okay, and then on slide 7, you discussed the responsive language training. And I was just so glad to hear that, because we all know how much words matter.
I want to clarify, not family, students, just for clarity. They're not all 240 students were enrolled, so not all families. I just want to make sure I'm clear about that.
Okay, student. So thank you for the language training, because words do matter. And then also on slide 7, where we're talking about inclusive, safe, and supportive climate, how are we measuring? It talks about a plan. Implement a multi-year professional learning plan that supports staff members by strengthening their ability to provide culturally responsive social emotional learning to students. How are we measuring that plan?
So the part of the plan that we're in charge of, the restorative practices, I would have to defer to Dr. Hughes in reference to that. We primarily are doing the responsive language part of it and the restorative practice training. And so we've trained, I want to make sure I got the numbers right. Students have reached. We trained over 400 individuals in the restorative practices, and we did this year specialized training with our deans of students. And so that's the only thing I could really speak to, so I want to be.
Yeah, absolutely, and I'll just add to that, and we'll be happy to provide some more details there, but when you begin to peel back to the driver, there are some data points identified in the strategic plan that are key metrics that we'll report on that are related to some of these efforts, so we'll definitely provide an update there.
Okay, thank you. That's all I had, Madam Chair. Thank you so much, Dr. Manz and Ms. Lewis.
Thank you, Ms. Kinsella. Ms. Ogburn.
Thank you. Just a wealth of information, and I'm going to sound like I'm jumping from thing to thing, but Dr. Cashwell was talking about from the beginning, and we adjust as we need to. And, Reverend Cooper and I were there at the beginning when you started. And if you look at what you were hired to do back then, it's very different now. And you've had to adjust as we've gotten feedback from the community, and we've shaped the work that you're doing. And then when Dr. Cashwell came on, it was shaped again. And I think it's kind of grown, if that is the right term, but I think that the work has been fine-tuned and, you know, like you said, award-winning. I mean, I think it's amazing what you're doing with the students and including members of, you know, with our community partners, with students, with parents. It's kind of all encompassing of our community, which is great, which was the intention from the beginning, but it's evolved and it's grown. And I'm sure you feel like your hands are just so full all the time. I can't imagine. But just a couple of kudos. You said from the beginning that you wanted to create a culture of belonging. And isn't that really what we all want? For ourselves, for our kids, we want them to find a place where they fit and they feel like they belong. I think that's so important to a child. And we were talking about this earlier with the HVA. It's that same feeling. You want to have kids feel like they belong. They want to see themselves reflected in the work that we do. And that's meeting their needs. It's just, to me, the crux of what you're working on. But just a couple of kudos to staff training. So that we are all equipped with the language that we need, with the strategies to handle issues as they arise, I think is so important. And the fact that we look through an equity lens sometimes that's new to people. That is hard. And I think it's giving them that chance, like you said, for personal growth. And that's what it's all about. Isn't that what education is all about, actually? But to another shout out to HEF, once again, coming through with a grant that is targeted and is really helping, and you're using it so well. I'm so glad to see that happen. But I would, if you could go to the recruitment slide, I did have just a question about that. The first one about recruiting and retaining. This one? The one before that. And keep going. There we go. Okay. Because you have the strategic goal, and then you have develop a comprehensive approach, develop and implement. Where are we in that, in this work? Because I know you've got a comprehensive approach, and you want to develop and implement a plan to actively recruit and retain. So how are you going to do that? Are we going to at some point see a plan from you, or is this the work we've already been hearing about from HR? Because I feel like we have heard a lot about that lately.
Absolutely. And I think in introducing this presentation, I mentioned that, you know, in previous presentations, whether it was our strategic plan update, then we saw a really deep dive from our human resources team on this particular goal right here. And so they sort of laid out what the hallmarks of that plan are. And then they nodded to a number of things you see on the next slide that were sort of being championed by by EDOs. So, I mean, it's definitely a partnership. It's teamwork. I would say that human resources is the department that really owns that comprehensive plan. And then you can see certainly the fingerprints of EDO multi-layered throughout that plan with specific strategies such as the ones you see here.
Well, absolutely. And that's why when I was looking at that, I'm like, develop a plan. We're working on that actively. But what is your role, do you feel like, in that development of that plan, and how do you see it going forward?
So I see my role. I mean, when I first took this position, that was one of the things in my job description, as you know. It was very clearly there. So I've taken a very active role in conversations. We've had some changes in human resources, so that's kind of been different. And then we had COVID, and so as those things were happening, I really targeted the provisional teachers, because the research showed that if we could get provisional teachers actually licensed, they were more likely to stay in the field. So as things were changing and evolving, that was probably my most significant charge, was trying to get funding for the Virginia Randolph New Teacher Legacy Program so that we could really work on that. So now teachers will be able to, provisionally licensed teachers will be able to take 2 courses. Each course will cost under $100, and that's from an $1,800 cost for a graduate course, just so for reference. And so that was really, to me, kind of my targeted work. And then as Ms. Bolden has come in, and she's really began to look at it a larger scheme. And so I think that she and her team are working to develop more of the plans that are kind of in the weeds. I've continued to work on that. The other program that was the GOATed program that you see there, which came from something I had been thinking a lot about even before I took this position, about how do we begin to get to diversity into our district, and not just racial diversity, but just men. A lot of our athletes, again, female athletes as well, but there's a lot of athletes that are men, and so, and how do we get those into our schools? We are a male-heavy district, and just how, when we think about diversity, sometimes I think people think only of the racial or the cultural, but there's also that component too. How do we get more men in the classroom so our boys can see themselves? And so that brought us to the goal, and that was something that I'm really excited to, when Tiffany came on, her husband is an ex-NFL player, so it was like the perfect match. And so we were able to really grow that idea out, and we're really excited about implementing it. And then the last thing I think is the career response ladder. We've completed all our trainings. We prepared to go. We've been ready when we first hear about the career ladder. We prioritized it so that when it came down, we were going to be prepared to be able to offer a credential. And so we've designed all of our trainings with the exception of one of our 4 sections, and that will be designed by the end of the summer. And so that we're ready and able for anyone who's interested in specializing or getting the credential for the culturally responsive education. So I would say in the large grand scheme of things, I've been in conversations with Ms. Bolden and supporting her, but a lot of the work I've done has been kind of more of the opportunity spaces because there has been transition, and I just wanted to make sure the work that we were doing was focused on what was asked of me at the very beginning of my position.
Well, and I'm so glad to see the career ladder credential there, you know, because we just are at the beginning of that, and I'm sure that's going to grow too and come up with more opportunities, because the name of your office, opportunities, and it's everywhere. And, you know, to me, that's, again, not only the culture of belonging, but that opportunity for growth is what it's all about. And so kudos, thank you so much for all the information. It's got to be exhausting, but the work continues. But thank you, appreciate it. Ms. Shea.
Thank you, Ms. Ogburn. And you know, kind of putting together some of the thoughts of multiple of my colleagues, I think your comments, Ms. Lewis, around belonging were just spot on. You know, we want all students to feel like valued, essential parts of their school community. And so, you know, kind of bouncing off Ms. Kinsella's question is how do we measure that? Right? So when we look at diversity, I mean, that's really numbers and statistics and data. That's quantifiable. When we look at equity, it's a little harder to quantify, but when we look at resources and opportunity, we have numbers there, we have our equity and index. But when we look at measuring belonging, that is such a qualitative and intangible thing. And but we've got to be able to measure it or track it in some way to know where our gaps are and also know where we're making growth. So do you have any insight on how you're tracking that?
Yeah, so we have the school climate survey actually has identified questions. So all the areas that, or many of the areas that we identify for belonging are actually aligned with questions on our school climate survey. And I'm a huge believer in the qualitative component of it. So we do focus groups. We use our equity ambassadors to support some of those efforts. And so I would say that that's one way that we do, or excuse me, 2 ways that we are looking to try to move that. And one of the things that we are looking to do more of is to have more pre and post survey work around it. So we're collecting more data around those feelings. Do you want to speak a little bit to that?
Sure. Okay. Yes, thank you for that question. So as Dr. Manz stated, we are, part of this work is when we're engaging with students and staff and families is to humanize the concepts that we're talking about so that they feel welcome enough to engage and to give that honest rhetoric that supports the work. And the reality is that a lot of this work is self-reflective and some of it, you know, it's slow work. That's just the truth behind it. So we are engaging in opening surveys, also with our trainings, having our participants engage in post surveys where they are offered the opportunity to share actual answers from their own voices and their own conversations that way.
Thank you so much. You mentioned the rights of belonging and that 3 middle schools are participating this year. Which 3 middle schools and how were they selected?
So they were selected based off of interest that had been expressed to me by either a school leader or just conversations about concerns that I had received from families. Also, we looked at the data to make sure that there was, using that survey data that we talked about, the belonging survey data, we went back and affirmed that those were the schools that had some needs. And I want to be really clear, the rights of belonging, it's not based off of racial or cultural, it's identifying students who that the school leaders will identify that there seems to be a level of disengagement in school activity. And so how do we begin? I think of it as a good to great. I think of a lot of times we talk about the students who are in need of additional supports, or we talk a lot about our students who are doing amazingly well. And so the rights of belonging are really an opportunity for us to talk about the kids who I call my bubble kids, who are just there. They're not, the capacity to be great is in them, but they need someone to stand up and push them along. And so that's really what the rights of belonging is about, is trying to create a space to push these students along.
So do you know which 3 middle schools?
Yes, it's Roth, Moody, and Fairfield. Yeah.
Thank you. And then just to kind of elevate the conversation that Ms. Kinsella brought forth with the refugee and immigrant populations, I'm so excited to hear about your work there and looking for new ways to connect them to community resources. My middle school, Quioccasin Middle School, has a lot of really quality conversations around this because they have a significant immigrant and refugee population that adds to this beautiful diversity of that school. And so I've had the privilege of debriefing with some of the educators there and hearing from them. And one thing that they have suggested perhaps could be helpful is looking at creating community groups around common languages so that particularly our EL families, where there is a big language gap at home, they can kind of rally around each other and be able to, in their native language, kind of trade ideas on how they've engaged in school and how they've accessed resources and that sort of thing. And so I don't know if that's part of what you're already doing, but I know our educators there kind of identified that as an opportunity to really engage families from across the district, but with that common language.
And that's really what the micro-mapping is supposed to start. So the micro-mapping is part of that, is to understand what the communities are and the language that they speak, where they exist, and then begin, the next step would be, how do we then begin to support them? And I have to shout out Family Engagement, who's here. They've been doing a small group around languages where they are actually beginning to have someone who comes in and speaks the home language as they're explaining information out to families. And so that's been really exciting, but this time will be community-based around something very similar. But first, we're starting with the micro-mapping. She only works 10 hours, so I have to be mindful. So she's working on the micro-mapping first, and then the next step is, how do we begin to create communities for them with common language or common culture, because there's oftentimes a common religion, but that doesn't always mean that it comes back to kind of where the community lives. And so that's what we're starting with. This is the first step.
Wonderful. And as you just pointed out, a great point, a lot of the work talked about today is really the intersection of a lot of departments with family and community engagement and you all and Sarah Modrak. And, it's really a team effort to, it's really infused in the work of the division and all that we do. And, just speaking on that more, I'm really excited when I look at kind of the locality of a lot of my refugee and immigrant families and the new adult education center, and that it will be walkable from that corridor. And just thinking about, how all these pieces come together to really make a big difference and move a needle. And anything kind of siloed, it's good, but when you string all these pieces together and it really is infused in our strategic plan, things become great, right? And the needle is moved. So anyway, I appreciate all of your work and your update today. Colleagues, anything further? All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.